The Mets scored 6 runs in extra innings and nearly lost the game. What happened on Monday night and what can be done moving forward to help this bullpen? We'll talk about that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, Monday night's game was almost 2 separate games. There was the first 9 innings, which was a really good pitcher's duel between David Peterson and McKenzie Gore. And then there was the extra inning, where 10 of the 16 runs that were scored in the game all took place in 1 inning. Crazy stuff. So let's start with the pitcher's duel part of it. And David Peterson held his own against a really good pitcher in McKenzie Gore, a guy that I think has a case to pitch in the All-Star game this year, one of the best young left-handed starters in baseball, throws really hard, and kept the Mets lineup off balance through most of this game. And Peterson hung in there. Third inning was the only one where he ran into some trouble. He walked C.J. Abrams with 1 out. Then he gave up 3 straight singles, which scored a couple of runs. Now, with that said, I didn't think that those pitches were terrible. One of them was, I actually will say, on those singles. There was one he threw to Joey Meneses, the third single that was right down the middle. But Lane Thomas hit a pitch that was up out of the zone, just got on top of it. There was a curveball dotted low and away that Harold Ramirez was able to flick his bat out to and get a hit. So some good hitting in that inning, and Peterson never lost his composure. He settled in. He made a pitch. He got a double play ball to get out of it. And then from that point on, he just locked in. The 4th inning, the 5th inning, the 6th inning, retired the side in order each time. Now, top of the 6th inning, the Mets gave him a lead just by really getting Gore out of the game. Harrison Bader gets a leadoff hit, steals second base. And then Mark Vientos' spot comes up in the lineup after J.D. Martinez had struck out and Pete Alonso had flew out. So Vientos comes up with 2 outs, and that's when they go to the bullpen. And this is what the threat of Mark Vientos will do to you, because McKenzie Gore gave up a home run to him the last time these two teams met. So they didn't want to run the risk. They go to the bullpen, and Vientos delivers against the righty. Gets a big 2-out hit to drive in Bader. Then you have some luck, quite honestly, as Tyrone Taylor reaches on an error. And Francisco Alvarez then doubles in both Taylor and Vientos. Taylor was stealing on the play, so easily scores on the double by Alvarez. All of a sudden, the game is flipped 3-2 Mets. And as I mentioned, Peterson a 1-2-3-6, which is huge to have that shutdown inning, and he did it on 8 pitches. Goes back out for the 7th that the Mets don't score, gets the first out. So at that point, he had retired 11 batters in a row, got 12 outs because the first of those 11 batters was to close out that 3rd inning with the double play ball, and then he gives up a base hit. At that point, Carlos Mendoza goes to the bullpen. Part of me would have liked to see him allow Peterson to pitch through that 7th inning, because I feel like he was still locked in and he could have got a ground ball and got out of it himself. But I understand it's a 1-run lead. So even though Peterson was at 86 pitches, you had a fresh Daniel Nunez, who he might have even thought, because I know it crossed my mind, Nunez has pitched and gotten 8 outs before. So maybe the thought was, let's send him out there and see how good he looks, because he'll hopefully get you through that 7th, which he did, get you through the 8th, and maybe he still has enough in the tank to get you that 9th inning as well, or you had Reed Garrett rested. So I really believe that when the Mets getting these situations right now with the bullpen that they have, and they have a 1-run lead to protect, why make it more dicey than you have to? Go to those 2 guys that you currently trust, and hopefully you can get the win. They got it, but it was a long, winding road to get there. So Nunez gets through the 7th, and then the 8th inning, he might have gotten through it, but with 2 outs, he walked Jesse Winker, and then he gives up a double, but really it was an error by Tyrone Taylor. He comes in on the ball a little bit too hard, gets on him quick, and gets past him. and that allows Winker to score. All of a sudden, it's a tie game. Nunez then fields a bunt, makes a good play, and gets out of that inning. I don't know what they were doing, bunting with 2 outs for a hit, but regardless, Nunez got them into the 9th inning. The Mets didn't score in the 9th. They go to Jake Diekman, and I will say Tyrone Taylor certainly made up for his missed play in the 8th because Diekman did everything he could to blow the game in that 9th inning. He made a terrible throw on a swinging bunt, if I'm not mistaken, from James Wood. I don't think that was an actual bunt. I think it was a swinging bunt, but regardless, a chopper tries to make a play on it, throws it past Alonso. James Wood standing on second base. Wood is the star rookie, the top prospect in all of baseball that debuted in this game to a lot of fanfare. And so when he was standing on second base with no outs and Jake Diekman on the mound, you thought, all right, that's game. But Diekman got a couple of ground balls and then a line drive that seemed destined for the right field corner, and Taylor makes a great running and leaping catch that saved the game, pushed it to extras, and that's when the Mets bats finally came through. JD Martinez hits a 3-run homer. You had the ghost runner on. Harrison Bader got hit by a pitch. So Martinez had a couple guys on and great at bat, falls behind the count, hangs in there, gets a pitch he can handle, crushes it dead center. And all of a sudden you have breathing room. And then beyond that, with 2 outs, Tyrone Taylor hits a double. Francisco Alvarez nearly homers himself, but hits off the wall. Is able to get a triple, and that scores Taylor. So now all of a sudden you have a 4-run cushion. And then Jose Iglesias homers, pretty much the same spot as Martinez, dead center. So now you're sitting 9-3, and it was like, all right, you don't even need to pitch Garrett. Here comes Tyler J. Take us on home. Man, it's frustrating to watch this bullpen because Jay walks the leadoff batter, gets a strikeout, gives up a double. All right, no harm. Gets another strikeout. You got 2 outs. They still are trying to just stick with Jay. You have such a big lead. You have such a thin bullpen. Don't put Garrett in this game. You want him fresh for the next day. Gives up another double, walks a batter. And at that point, you got the tying runner coming up to the plate. There was 2 guys on. You had to go to Garrett. You had to. And of course, he comes on, gives up a single. I'll tell you, my dad was texting me at the time, and later I checked, and we got some subtexters too who sent some text messages that I'll have to respond to tomorrow. But the fan base was freaking out. I actually, for some reason, was calm. I just felt like bottom part of the order, Garrett was going to get out of it, but it was dicey. Okay, it's 9-7 right after you had scored 6 runs, and it felt like the game was already over. So really nerve-wracking. He gets the strikeout. All is well. The Mets get the victory. But it continues to showcase the problem. Now, it's a problem that will get better when Edwin Diaz comes back, because then you'll have Edwin Diaz, Daniel Nunez, and Reed Garrett. Okay, that's 3 arms that I think you can trust. I know there's people that maybe look at Diaz's season totals and think you can't trust him and are going to point to the sticky stuff and say that, was he using that when he looked pretty good in those a couple appearances coming off the IL? I think Diaz is going to be fine. I really do believe that. But even with Diaz, this team is going to need to do something to fortify this bullpen, because you have a lineup that is clearly good enough to make the playoffs this year. The way Alvarez and Vientos are playing with the star players you already have in place, they have a good enough starting lineup to make a run, particularly in this National League. We're going to talk about some starters in this next segment as well, who are coming back into the fold. Christian Scott this week, Kodai Senga beginning a rehab assignment. I think this rotation is fine. The bullpen is a massive problem. So what will they do about it? Can they use their starter depth to their advantage to help an ailing bullpen? We're going to go through that and Kodai Senga and Christian Scott's status in the next segment here. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But with the playoffs now over in the NBA and the NHL, we got fewer games. The sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want, because all I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our text and service where you get updates from me anytime some news breaks on the Mets. You also can ask me questions anytime or just send your rage texts when the Mets are blowing a game potentially in extra innings. Just fire away those text messages. Tell me how much you are frustrated. I always love to read those, especially when I have the hindsight of the Mets actually having won the game. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk about this bullpen and also just this pitching staff as a whole. We're going to open with the rotation because there are some developments to discuss. The first one is Kodai Senga will make a rehab start in Brooklyn on Wednesday. He's going to throw 40 pitches. Then he's probably going to throw every 6th day, hopefully for the rest of the year, but particularly on his rehab assignments to get him ready to hopefully join a Mets rotation at the end of this month, if not early August. If you think about him ramping up 15 pitches at a time, which is pretty standard, that's basically adding an inning each time you go through it. Since he's starting at 40, his next start should be 55. Then you maybe get up to 70. Then you get up to 80. Then maybe 95. You're pretty much ready to go at that point. So there is a world where he might only need 4 rehab starts. If that's the case and you do the math every 6th day, you got the 3rd, Wednesday, the 9th, the 15th, which is the home run derby. No affiliate is playing at that time, but I'm sure they can get some hitters together for Senga to throw a live BP, maybe even a simulated game, and get him the work that he needs, probably in Brooklyn or whatever it is. Then you'd have the 21st as his 4th rehab start, and earliest possible return, I'd imagine, would be the 27th, which would happen to be a Saturday afternoon game at Citi Field against the Atlanta Braves. So best case scenario, I think that's when you see Kodai Senga. If not, maybe it's one start beyond that early into August, but at least there's a return in sight now with Senga, and that is going to push you into an eventual 6-man rotation. Now, Christian Scott is going to make his return to the Mets rotation on Wednesday. That was announced today. So you got Sean and I going on Tuesday night, Scott on Wednesday, Quintana on Thursday. Eventually, when you get Senga back, the Mets can roll a rotation out there of Luis Severino, Kodai Senga, Christian Scott, Sean Manaea, David Peterson, and Jose Quintana. 3 righties, 3 lefties. Now, of course, there's been a lot of talk about the Mets potentially selling off some of their starter depth at the deadline. So maybe you trade a Quintana or a Manaea. I don't think you trade Severino if you're in the mix. And honestly, it might not make sense to trade any of your starter depth because I don't know how much you're going to get in return for Jose Quintana. Regardless, though, whether you trade one of them or not, you still have Jose Butto, you still have Tyler McGill, you have Adrian Houser that's already in a bullpen role, and you have Joey Lucchesi. The Mets might need to take advantage of those starters and find a way to utilize them out of the bullpen, with Jose Butto being the first guy that I'm looking at here. Because you can't tell me that Jose Butto would not be better out of the bullpen than the Festas and the Jays of the world, Ty Adcock, all of these guys. They're now trying to pull from Syracuse and hope they find another diamond in the rough like they did with Reed Garrett. And maybe Adcock is one of those guys. He certainly had a good first appearance, much better than Festa and Jay. And I would hope that one of those 2 guys is going to get sent down for a fresh arm on Tuesday, whether that's Cole Sulser, Josh Walker, who knows? Eric Orrs. I mean, there's some options the Mets could dip into in the short term, but none of them is going to cure the real problem. Whereas I can see Jose Butto giving you a solution. Because if you can have 2 Adrian Housers, and I've talked about this already, but it's something that I really wanted to hammer the point in on today, because I really believe that it's almost old school pitching, right? Where you'd have these guys that would come in the 7th inning and they just close out the game for you. If the Mets can get to that point where they have a Butto or a Hauser ready almost every game and your starter only goes 5, well, now you can go to Jose Butto, and if he's on, he might close the game for you, at least be the bridge to Edwin Diaz, where you save a Daniel Nunez and a Reed Garrett. So the next day, if you don't have Edwin Diaz, you still have those guys that you can go to. Having Garrett and Nunez be able to give you multiple innings is great, but then they're not available the next day. So it's just a constant grind of trying to figure out a combination that's going to close out games for you. And I almost think that Butto and Hauser are more prepared to pitch and leverage than pretty much anybody the Mets have on their 40-man roster or in Syracuse outside of the three guys that we've talked about, Diaz, Nunez, and Garrett. Maybe Adam Ottavino if he can really figure things out. And then outside of that, there was Sean Reed-Foley when he comes off the IL. Other than that, I don't trust any of these guys. I don't trust Jake Diekman. I did trust Danny Young, but his last stint didn't look great. So I don't know where else they turn to. To me, that makes the most sense. Now, the question then becomes, all right, Jose Butto goes into the bullpen on Tuesday. Now, he pitched on Friday. So can he pitch on 3 days rest? As a reliever, I think he might be able to. Even if not, okay, well, then he should be good to go on Wednesday if that's when they make the move. So let's just say that's what happens. Christian Scott goes 5. Butto piggybacks it and gets them all the way through the rest of the game potentially. Awesome. Well, what's going to happen the next time you need Christian Scott's turn in the rotation? Is he going to be able to pitch on 4 days rest? It's a really interesting dilemma because you look at the road ahead until you get to the All-Star break. And if Christian Scott cannot pitch on 4 days rest, he's only going to start twice in the next 2 weeks, one start a week. His spot's going to come up 3 times regardless. So you're going to have to figure out at least one, if not 2, spot starts or bullpen games with Scott in the rotation. Now, maybe it's a moot point. Like I said, maybe they think that he can go every 5th day. And I hope he can because that just makes everything easier. He had plenty of rest before his start here because they were really monitoring him in AAA over the past month. So maybe they just think, all right, it's 3 starts. You then have the All-Star break. So you have sort of another built-in rest period. He doesn't have to start one of the first games out of the break. So you can really you can really bake in a lot of rest before and after these 3 starts. Maybe they're just like, all right, let's just slide him in, 5-man rotation, let's go. If not, though, and you use Butto out of the rotation, what happens when he comes back around? Bullpen game. And you know what? As long as you have one of Butto or Hauser rested enough to give you 50 pitches in that bullpen game and cover 3 innings, you can go with an opener if you want to, have them cover the middle innings. You can have them start the game as your spot starter and do the best you can with it. But that still might be the best mode because you might just find that it all lines up and maybe Butto is just making a start anyway, but you had him available in case you needed him in that period between starts. So I really think that this team, if you look at their pitching as a whole, they have a real strength, and that's a strength in numbers with their starters. Now, Tyler Miguel is another guy where he could be more effective out of the bullpen. And they can go to that after the All-Star break. That's one of the reasons why I was frustrated with them optioning him later than I wish or later than they could have, right? They could have optioned him early. We won't revisit it. But the point is, had they done that, he could have been available to come up and make a spot start or to come up and help the bullpen down the stretch before the break if they needed him to. Now you have to wait till after. But still, the point stands. Once you get there, once he is eligible to return, Tyler McGill could be a guy that could come out of the bullpen. If Adrian Hauser's stuff has played up as much as it has as a reliever, imagine how much Tyler McGill's stuff could play up. And the same thing goes with Butto, even Joey Lucchesi. At a certain point, just get the best pitchers on this team. Because these other guys that they're trying to fit in and they're hoping to get something out of, they're just not good enough. And it creates more of a problem, right? Where if let's just lay it out like this. If Jose Butto was available in the bullpen and they could have gone to him in a 9-3 game where they just need 3 outs and it's almost like throwing a side session. It's just a bullpen for him. And you're not even burning him too much. He just goes out there. You're telling me that Jose Butto could not have gotten 3 outs more effectively than Tyler J did tonight? I really think he would have been able to. So we'll see how they decide to utilize Butto if and when he comes up this week. If it is just, all right, he's going to be the 6th starter when Christian Scott's turn comes up on Monday in the rotation. You're going to go to Butto and you're going to have a 6-man rotation because you have Edwin Diaz coming back. So you can have a 7-man bullpen, 6-man rotation. Let that 6-man rotation with Butto in the fold carry you until Senga comes back, and then maybe then you slide Butto into the bullpen. That might be the way they decide to do it. But personally, I think they need as many good pitchers in that bullpen as possible. I don't care if they're starters. All good relievers were starters once, right? So the best pitchers on your team or in your organization are typically the guys that are still being allowed to go out and try to be starters. The Mets had to lean into that if they're going to get through this season. Otherwise, you got to be very aggressive at the trade deadline. And that's where I want to close the show today. When is it viable for the Mets to make a trade? And what are some names that are out there that could potentially fill that void? I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Also, Brandon Nimmo situation. So we'll get to all of it. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, Prize Picks is just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. Get on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You could turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match on Prize Picks up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. Today's episode is also brought to you by Tax Network USA. Here at Locked On Mets, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. It is year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even can seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. You can also see the link in the episode description below. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. A pretty crazy situation with Brandon Nimmo that we learned about today. He was not in the starting lineup. We thought, okay, I guess just a day off for Brandon. Then we find out that he was in the hospital. He had some episode in his hotel room where essentially he fainted, hit his head, had to go to the hospital, make sure everything was okay. The long story short of it is he is fine and they're monitoring him. Doesn't seem like it's something that will be reoccurring or an issue he has to worry about, but definitely a really strange set of circumstances. I encourage you, if you're curious, to look up Brandon Nimmo on YouTube, and you can see a whole long video at the media where he explained what happened. I'm not sure if he's going to be back in the lineup on Tuesday. Out of abundance of caution, maybe they give him a whole nother day to just rest it. They have another lefty on the mound. The Nationals do on Tuesday, so maybe you have Nimmo come off the bench, roll out that same lineup you had today potentially, or maybe you get Ben Gamble in the lineup in the outfield instead of Jeff McNeil. Who knows? But we'll see. It doesn't seem like it's going to be some type of a lengthy absence for Nimmo. And even though he's got a cut on his head, no concussion or anything like that. So in the long run, good news on Nimmo that it wasn't something worse. So let's now revisit this bullpen and talk about outside additions. This was going to be a podcast that I was going to do closer to the deadline, and it probably still will be, but I was doing a little bit of preliminary research today on just relievers the Mets can target, 5 trades that would bolster the Mets bullpen. I didn't narrow in on the prospects that would go back, but I was just trying to find guys I think the Mets would actually target, because you can say that Mason Miller would be a great fit in the Mets. And yes, of course he would. He's one of the best closers in baseball right now. Team control for, like his full team control. He's still a rookie, I believe. I don't think he exceeded rookie status. So you're talking about a guy you had for 5+ years. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. But is it realistic to think the New York Mets are going to go all in on a closer for this team? And all in, I mean having to trade up multiple top 100 prospects. No. Now there's rentals out there. So Carlos Estevez is a rental closer for the Angels. Tanner Scott, a rental closer for the Marlins. Those guys, though, are going to cost a lot, and rental trades almost never work. You either have to win the World Series or extend the guy. Otherwise, you're going to lose that trade 9 times out of 10 unless the prospects you give up in the deal just never materialize. You're almost always going to lose a rental trade. We actually have an article coming up today, I think, with justbaseball.com, where I went through since 2020 and I found all of the worst rental trades of the last 5 years, basically since 2020. It's really when we narrowed in on, and you see all of them are just a team that's trying to go for it. And a lot of times the rental trades are teams that are in the Mets position, where it looks even worse because it's teams that are in the fringes. They're in the wild card race, but they're not definitively going to make it. And they push the chips forward and then it blows up in their face. The PCA trade is in there. That's, of course, Pete Crow Armstrong heading to the Cubs for Javi Baez and Trevor Williams, which sort of made it a non-rental trade because Williams was a year and a half of control, but still, would the Mets want that trade back? I mean, Pete Crow Armstrong could be in the Mets outfield right now and playing elite defense in center field. So I think the Mets would be very hesitant to trade for a rental reliever unless it's just a minimal return that has to go out for them. So maybe you would get some rental reliever, but a rental closer type, a guy that is the one chip that a team is trying to sell, like Estevez or Scott. I just don't see the Mets being that team that makes that deal. But would they push more chips forward for a reliever that has multiple years of control? I think that is the market that David Stearns would more likely want to shop in. And I look in Detroit and I see Jason Foley, really good fit to me. A guy that just throws 100+ mile per hour sinkers nonstop and just gets a ton of outs. He's also a closer right now for the Tigers. He's got 3 years of control. So that's the guy I'm targeting. He doesn't hit arbitration until after this year. It's 3 years of control beyond this season. And you might be able to get Andrew Chafin in that trade. Chafin not having the best season, but his expected ERA, expected FIP are better than his actual ERA. A left-handed reliever might benefit from a change of scenery. Who knows? Sometimes these guys change locations and they just all of a sudden lock in. So I could see a world the Mets could make a trade like that, get 2 arms, and then put together a package. But it's worth it because Jason Foley is the back of your bullpen with Edwin Diaz for the foreseeable future. That's a trade I can see the Mets making. The Blue Jays, if they fall out of it, they have a couple of relievers that are really interesting. The main one, Chad Green. Chad Green, of course, formerly with the Yankees, is pitching to a sub-2 ERA right now on an expensive contract that the Blue Jays probably wouldn't mind getting off of their books. And you'd have not just for this year, but also for next year. He'd be expensive money-wise, but the prospect return might not be too much to get him. That seems like a great fit for the Mets. Yimi Garcia is a rental from the Blue Jays as well. Could you get both of them in the trade? If you give a little bit more on the prospect capital, maybe you could, and then it's easier to swallow giving up prospects for Yimi Garcia in the deal because you're getting Chad Green for another year. So that's the way I really look at this. The other team was the Rays. Jason Adam, Pete Fairbanks. Really good relievers. Still 2 years of control beyond this season. The Rays don't have to trade them, but they might take advantage of the market and look to get a position player prospect or something like that, or a starting pitching prospect for a reliever. And they are a team that would capitalize on the market if they view themselves as sellers. Here's the thing about the 3 teams I just talked about and the relievers I think David Stearns would target. The Tigers, the Blue Jays, and the Rays. None of them is at the point where they are definitive sellers, where they would trade right now. And even if you look at the Angels or the Marlins, who are more definitively going to be sellers, why take a call now and make a trade with the Mets at the beginning of July when there might be 4 teams that create a bidding war around your player at the deadline? It doesn't make sense. The deadline is when these deals happen. So I don't think the Mets can make a move until then. In which case, going back to the point of the last segment, use Jose Butto, use Tyler McGill, see what you have with your starters as relievers for the second half of this month in particular. but see what you have, because that might inform you on what you need at the deadline. Maybe you don't need as much. Maybe if you're on the phone with the Blue Jays, instead of trying to get both Chad Green and Yimi Garcia, you just get Chad Green, right? Because now the package can be less that you give up to acquire him, because you're just getting one guy, but Tyler McGill looks great in the bullpen. All right. That's one more ace in the holster for you. Another option that you have potentially. So the Mets are going to have to figure this thing out internally. And the good news is you're playing the Nationals, then you're playing the Pirates, then you're playing the Nationals again. And hopefully the bats can continue to give you big leads that the bullpen just can't squander, because it's a 6-run lead in extra innings. So even though Tyler J absolutely blows it, you still won the game. So you survive another day. And you're going to get Edwin Diaz back on Saturday. 4 more games you get him back. That's the main point of it. So I think that's where they're at this point. You got DJ Hers pitching on Tuesday night against Sean Manaea. Hers did not pitch well against the Mets last time around. Hasn't really pitched well since coming up and making his debut against the Mets. You got to take advantage of that. Score a bunch of runs. Hopefully Sean Manaea can give this team some length. You have Adam Ottavino's fresh. Trying to think about the fresh arms that you're going to have. Hauser, could he go after 1 day's rest? Because he only pitched a couple innings on Sunday. I don't know. Probably not. So probably no Hauser. Probably no Nunez. Garrett, I imagine you'd still have again in a safe situation. Didn't throw too much. And then whoever they cycle into this bullpen, Ty Adcock would be good to go as well. So we'll see how the Mets piece it together on Tuesday, if they can continue to beat the Nationals and advance themselves in the wild card race. But the bullpen is something that all eyes are going to be on throughout this month. So the Mets have to figure it out if they want to be a true contender in 2024. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Appreciate all of you who tuned into the show. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, we're looking to get to 9,000 subs by the All-Star break. We're very close to being 100 away. So I appreciate all of you who continue to hit that subscribe button. If you want to follow me on X, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that covers everything in the world of sports. You can also check out Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on Amazon Fire TV.